You pass someone on the street, a complete stranger. You've never met them, you'll probably never see them again. And for no rational reason, you pull the corners of your mouth up, you crinkle your eyes, and you show them your teeth. They do exactly the same thing back. The whole exchange lasts less than a second, and then you both walk on as if nothing happened. You do this dozens of times a day without thinking about it. But if you stop and actually ask why would a species show its teeth to every stranger it meets? The answer leads somewhere deeply strange. Because that reflex in your face right now, that thing you call a friendly smile, did not start as friendliness at all. And understanding where it actually came from will change how you see every face you pass for the rest of your life. For most of human prehistory, smiling at a stranger would have been one of the last things you ever did. Not because ancient humans were unfriendly, but because there were almost no strangers to smile at. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human alive lived inside a band of 30 to 50 people. These were your kin, your daily companions, the people you were born near and died near. You did not need to signal anything to them with your face. They already knew you. They had known you your entire life. When primatologist Signe Preischoff traced the evolutionary roots of the human smile back more than 30 million years, she found something that most people would prefer not to know. The smile did not originate as a signal of warmth. It originated as something far more anxious. A bared teeth display inherited from our primate ancestors, used to signal submission to a dominant animal. I'm not a threat. Please don't attack me. That is what a smile meant for most of primate evolution. And here is the uncomfortable part. Some version of that meaning is still operating in your face every day. Look at what happens when a chimpanzee shows its teeth to a more dominant group member. The expression they make, lips pulled back, teeth exposed, is structurally almost identical to a human social smile. But no researcher has ever looked at a chimpanzee doing that and thought, that animal is happy to see you. Because it isn't. It's afraid. It's offering appeasement. The signal means roughly, I acknowledge that you are more powerful than me, and I am not here to challenge that. Among our distant primate cousins, the bared teeth display is not a greeting between friends. It is a signal between unequals. But that is not even the strangest part of this story. The strangest part is what happened next. The moment our ancestors repurposed that ancient anxiety reflex into something that would eventually allow the entire human species to cooperate on a scale no other animal had ever attempted. Robin Dunbar, evolutionary anthropologist at Oxford University, has spent decades studying what he calls the social brain hypothesis. The idea that the human brain grew as large as it did specifically to manage the complexity of social relationships. What his research makes clear is that at some point, the scale of human social life crossed a threshold that physical contact alone could not maintain. Other primates bond through grooming. You pick through my fur, I pick through yours. We release endorphins. We feel connected. The relationship holds. But grooming takes time. It works fine in small bands. When Dunbar modeled what size groups hominins could maintain purely through touch-based bonding, he found a hard ceiling. Something else was needed if groups were going to grow. Laughter, and eventually the social smile, became part of that solution. And then, keep this in mind because it becomes critical. Around this same period, archaeologists begin finding something new in the ground. The evidence surfaces at places like Bismoon Cave in Morocco, where archaeologist Stephen Kuhn of the University of Arizona and his team uncovered shell beads dated to at least 142,000 years ago, currently the oldest known personal ornaments in the world. Similar beads appear at Blombos Cave in South Africa, dated to around 75,000 years ago. And by 40,000 years ago, humans across the globe were transporting decorative shells over distances of more than 500 kilometers. Think about what that actually means. Someone picked up a shell on a coastline. That shell ended up 500 kilometers inland. You do not carry a decorative shell that far unless you are moving through a world where meeting strangers sometimes ends well. You do not trade across that kind of distance unless you have some way of signaling to someone you have never met. I am not here to harm you. The beads and the smile are part of the same story. Both are solutions to the same problem. How do you communicate safe intent to a face you do not recognize? Neuroscientist Paula Niebenthal at the University of Wisconsin-Madison studied the cultural spread of smiling across human populations and found something striking. Societies with longer histories of migration and intergroup contact smile more at strangers. Communities that were isolated for thousands of years smile significantly less. That is not a personality difference. That is evolutionary calibration. A smile at a stranger is a compressed negotiation. It is saying, I see you. I acknowledge you. I am not afraid of you, and you do not need to be afraid of me. In under a second, with no words at all. But here is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, because the brain running this negotiation is not nearly as simple as it looks. When Guillaume Duchenne, a 19th century French neurologist, spent years mapping what a real smile looks like versus a performed one, He discovered that genuine and false smiles are controlled by entirely different parts of the brain. A real smile, what researchers now call the Duchenne smile, recruits two muscle groups simultaneously: the zygomatic major pulling up the corners of the mouth, and the orbicularis oculi crinkling the skin around the eyes. You cannot fake that second contraction on demand. It is driven by the limbic system, the deep subcortical architecture that predates conscious thought by millions of years. The polite stranger smile, by contrast, runs through the motor cortex, the deliberate conscious system, and research from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology found that children as young as 2 years old can reliably distinguish between the two. Not because anyone taught them, but because that discrimination was built in. You inherited this detector. It runs in the background of every interaction you have, constantly, without your permission. Now go back to that shell bead carried 500 kilometers across an ancient landscape. Someone looked at a stranger's face and made a decision. The decision to approach, to trade, to share something. That micro-assessment of another human's expression may be one of the most consequential moments in our species' history. The long-range trade networks that followed were not just about shells and ochre and obsidian. They carried ideas, technologies, survival strategies across populations. Groups that could read strangers accurately and signal trust convincingly could reach farther, trade wider, learn faster. The social smile was not merely a social nicety. It may have been one of the engines of the cognitive revolution, the acceleration of human culture that archaeologists still puzzle over today. Disclaimer: this video discusses anthropological and archaeological research for educational purposes. Modern hunter-gatherer observations are used as comparative models to understand ancient human behavior, not as definitive proof of how all ancient humans lived across different time periods and geographies. So the next time you pass a stranger and that thing happens in your face, the corners pulling up, the eyes crinkling, the whole silent exchange over before you can think about it, you are not just being polite. You are running a piece of software that is at least 142,000 years old, an ancient submission reflex repurposed by evolution into a handshake between minds, a signal compressed to under a second that somehow carried the whole weight of human civilization inside it. You are not a threat to me. I am not a threat to you. That is all it ever said. And somehow, that was enough.